The Alpha's order was a quiet, venomous thing in the dark. Kill the Omega. Bury the proof. For Beta Asher Vance, it was the moment his world fractured. Obey and become a monster. Refuse and forfeit his rank, his home, possibly his life. He had 30 seconds to choose, but the choice was stolen when the ground itself began to tremble. That tremor was the arrival of Arik Thorn, the Alpha King. His sudden presence at their remote outpost could mean only one thing. The pack's corruption had finally drawn the attention of the One Wolf, with the absolute power to burn it all down. And Beta Asher, caught in the crossfire, was about to learn that sometimes salvation feels exactly like judgment. To understand the weight of that order, you have to understand the Shadow Fang Pack. Nestled in the dense, mist-shrouded forests of the Pacific Northwest, it was a pack built on a simple, brutal principle: absolute loyalty to Alpha Kale, or absolute ruin. Kale wasn't just an alpha, he was a tyrant who had seized power 15 years prior in a bloody coup that left the previous alpha's family extinct. He ruled not through ancient lineage, but through fear, controlling lucrative but illegal timber operations on protected federal land. The pack wasn't wealthy from tradition, it was rich from crime. And at Kale's right hand stood Beta Asher Vance. Asher was the pack's chief enforcer, a mountain of a man with a calm demeanor that masked lethal precision. He wasn't born into the role. He earned it, clawing his way up from the rank of a common guardian after single-handedly thwarting a rogue attack that would have slaughtered a dozen pups. His loyalty to the pack, to the families, the territory, the idea of safety was his core. He believed Kale's harshness was a necessary shield against a dangerous world. But that shield had begun to tarnish. The illegal logging expanded. Kale started skimming from the pack treasury, diverting funds meant for housing and healthcare into private offshore accounts. Dissenting voices among the elders began to disappear, labeled as traitors. Asher executed the Alpha's justice, but a cold knot of doubt had started to form in his gut. The Omega in question was a young wolf named Eli. Omegas in Shadowfang weren't the cherished healers or peacekeepers of lore. They were the pack's menial labor, the cleaners, the cooks, the ones who repaired fences in the freezing rain. Eli was quiet, diligent, and tragically observant. 3 nights ago, while working late in the pack archive shed, Eli had witnessed Kale and a human contractor finalize a deal to clear-cut a sacred grove, a site of ancient pack burials, for triple the usual profit. Eli, believing it was a mistake, had brought the contract manifests to Asher, his direct superior, hoping the Beta could intervene. Asher had taken the documents and told Eli to speak of it to no one. He then brought them directly to Kale. That was his duty. The Alpha's reaction wasn't anger, but a cold, calculating smile. He praised Asher for his loyalty. Then he gave the order. The Omega is a liability. He's unstable, accusing his Alpha of crimes. He'll bring human environmental investigators down on us all. Kill him. Make it look like a rogue attack. Bury the proof. For Asher, the world narrowed to the cold metal of his hunting knife and the faint, fearful scent of the young wolf trembling in the rain-soaked clearing. This wasn't justice. This was cleanup. Eli hadn't betrayed the pack. He'd tried to protect it. Murdering him wouldn't secure their future. It would damn their souls. But refusal meant death. Kale's 2 personal enforcers, twins with dead eyes named Jax and Rafe, were undoubtedly watching from the tree line. Asher's own family, his younger sister who lived in pack housing, would suffer. The code was clear. The Alpha's word is law. The Beta's role is to enforce it, not question it. He looked at Eli, who had stopped pleading and simply stared back, resigned. In that silence, Asher made his choice. He would not be the monster. He lowered his knife. The moment his hand opened, a shockwave of pure, unadulterated alpha power exploded through the forest. It was a pressure so vast and ancient, it didn't feel like a wolf, but like the mountain itself had awakened. Every creature fell silent. Then the ground shook. The king was here. And Asher, standing over the Omega he refused to kill, was holding the knife directly in the line of sight of the most powerful being on the continent. Time didn't freeze. It shattered. The Alpha King's convoy wasn't a line of cars. It was a rolling fortress of blacked-out military vehicles that surrounded the clearing. Wolves in tactical gear, marked with the obsidian fist sigil of the Northern Territory, moved with silent, lethal precision, securing the perimeter. And in the center of it all stood Arik Thorn. He wasn't just tall, he was a pillar of contained violence. His hair was the color of winter ash, his eyes a glacial blue that scanned the scene and seemed to catalogue every sin. He didn't radiate rage like Kale. His power was quieter, denser, a gravitational pull that forced the very air to bow. His gaze moved from Asher, still holding the knife, to Eli cowering on the ground, to the twins Jax and Rafe emerging nervously from the trees, and finally settled on Alpha Kale, who had just stormed into the clearing from the pack house. The king spoke first, his voice a low rumble that bypassed the ears and vibrated in the chest. "Explain this." Kale, to his credit, recovered with viper speed. He bowed deeply, the picture of contrite authority. "My king. A tragic internal matter. This Omega," he said, gesturing dismissively at Eli, "has succumbed to madness. He stole sensitive pack documents, made wild accusations. My beta was administering final judgment for treason." Eric Thorne didn't blink. He took a single step forward, and the entire clearing seemed to tilt toward him. "Judgment. You sentence your own pack members to death in the dark without a council, without a trial." "The safety of the pack is my first law," Kale insisted, a thread of defiance in his voice. He was a rot from within. "My beta understands this duty." All eyes turned to Asher. The knife felt like a red-hot brand in his hand. This was his off-ramp. Kale had just handed him a story that would preserve his rank, his life. All he had to do was confirm it. Nod. Say the words. He looked at Eli, who was shaking, his eyes wide with a terror that was no longer about death, but about being erased by the lie. Asher's mouth was dry. He opened it, but the lie wouldn't come. The knot of doubt in his gut pulled taut. "The documents he took," Asher heard himself say, his voice rough. "They weren't accusations, they were contracts, for clear-cutting the ancestors' grove." The silence that followed was more profound than any that had come before. Kale's face went from pale to mottled purple. Eli gasped. Even the king's enforcers seemed to tense. "You treacherous dog," Kale snarled, taking a step toward Asher, but a low warning growl from one of the king's guards froze him in place. Eric Thorne finally looked directly at Asher, and the beta felt laid bare, every compromise, every ignored instinct, every moment of cowardice scrutinized. "You had the evidence of a crime against pack legacy," the king stated, "and your alpha ordered you to kill the witness. It wasn't a question, it was a verdict." Asher could only give one answer. He let the knife fall from his hand. It stuck, point down, in the wet earth between them. Yes. In that moment, Asher Vance was no longer the beta of Shadow Fang. He was a prisoner of his own honesty, standing in the no-man's land between a tyrant who wanted him dead and a king who had no reason to believe him. But the king's attention had already shifted. He nodded to one of his aides, a severe-looking woman with a data tablet. "Secure the Omega. Take him to the medical vehicle. Full scan, full statement." As Eli was helped to his feet, shaking, the king turned his icy gaze back to Kale. "You will surrender all pack financial records, land deeds, and communication logs for the past 5 years, now." Kale's defiance crumbled into panic. "You can't just march in here and make these demands. This is my territory," Eric Thorne smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Asher had ever seen. "Your territory exists because the Northern Council permits it. Your authority is alone. And after a decade of intelligence on your smuggling, your embezzlement, and your poisonings, that loan," the king said, taking another step forward, "is officially called due." The revelation hit like a hammer. The king hadn't arrived by chance. He hadn't come because of a single Omega. He was the end of a long, slow investigation. Kale was the target. This clearing was just the opening move. Kale understood this too. The fear in his eyes morphed into desperate calculation. He looked at Jax and Rafe. He looked at the other Shadowfang guards who had gathered at the tree line, confused and leaderless. He was cornered, and a cornered snake strikes. "Shadowfang!" Kale roared, his alpha power flaring out in a desperate wave. "They come to take our land, to dissolve our pack. Defend your home." It was a classic, brutal play. Redirect the threat. Make it an invasion, not an arrest. For a heartbeat, it worked. The pack guards shifted, their loyalty to their home warring with their fear of the king. Jax and Rafe bared their teeth, stepping toward the king's guards. Eric Thorne didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Stand down." The command carried the weight of centuries of authority. Half the Shadow Fang guards dropped to one knee, instincts overriding Kale's orders. But Jax and Rafe, Kale's personal creatures, were too far gone. They lunged, not at the king, but at the closest target of opportunity, Asher. The world exploded into motion. Asher, weaponless, braced for impact. But the king moved. He didn't shift, he didn't roar. He simply stepped into the path of the twins. One moment they were charging. The next, Eric Thorne had caught Jax by the throat and Rafe by the arm. There was a sickening crack of bone and a choked gurgle. He threw Jax's limp body into Rafe, sending them both crashing into a tree trunk where they slumped, unconscious. It was over in 2 seconds. The display of effortless, brutal power was absolute. The last resistance in the Shadowfang guards evaporated. Kael, seeing his final play annihilated, did the only thing he had left. He ran. He turned and bolted into the dense forest, towards the network of logging roads and hidden caches he'd prepared for this exact scenario. The king didn't chase him. He turned to his head of security, a grizzled wolf with a scar across his jaw. Track him. Contain him. I want him alive for the council's judgment. As the security team vanished into the woods like ghosts, the king finally turned back to Asher. The beta stood alone in the center of the clearing, the discarded knife at his feet, the unconscious twins nearby, his alpha fleeing, his pack in shambles. He was adrift. The king approached, stopping just out of arm's reach. "You lowered your blade," Arik Thorn said, his voice now devoid of its earlier courtroom chill, replaced by something more assessing. Why? Asher met his gaze, the last of his defenses gone. Because it was wrong. The king studied him for a long silent moment. Then he gestured to the pack house, its lights now blazing as panicked wolves looked out. "Your pack is leaderless, its beta is complicit in its crimes, even by inaction. The council will dissolve it, the members will be scattered as rogues." Asher's heart sank. This was the cost. The families, the pups, the innocent wolves who knew nothing of Kael's schemes, they would all pay for his and Kael's failures. "But," the king continued, his tone shifting once more, "there is a precedent for contested territory. If a pack member of sufficient rank challenges for leadership in the wake of a corrupt alpha's removal, and can prove both capability and moral warrant, the council may grant a probationary mandate." The meaning crashed over Asher. He was the only ranked wolf left who wasn't a criminal or unconscious. The challenge wasn't to a fight, it was to prove he could clean up the catastrophic mess Kael had left behind. It was a chance for redemption, or a deeper, more public damnation. "Can you lead them, Beta Asher Vance?" the king asked, the question hanging in the mist like a blade. "Or will you let what remains of Shadowfang die with its alpha?" Asher's answer wasn't a choice. It was an avalanche. "I will lead them." With those 4 words, he inherited a kingdom of rot. The king's forces moved in, turning the pack house into a forensic lab and a prison. Asher's first act as provisional alpha was to stand before his shell-shocked pack and tell them their world was built on lies. He laid it bare. The stolen funds, the poisoned land, the murdered elders. He saw the confusion, the anger, the betrayal in their eyes. Some, like the families of the disappeared, wept with grim validation. Others, the enforcers and accountants who had benefited from Kael's reign, glared with open hostility. The pack was a fracture waiting for pressure. The king provided a temporary framework, a garrison of his wolves to keep order, and a council auditor named Lin to untangle the finances. But the real work fell to Asher. He spent days and nights in the archives with Eli, who had become a terrified but determined ally, reconstructing the true pack ledgers. What they found was worse than theft. Kael had been selling off pack territory in secret, parceling out ancestral hunting grounds to a shell corporation called Timberhawk Holdings. The pack was not just broke, it was on the verge of being legally homeless. Meanwhile, the manhunt for Kael had gone cold. He'd vanished into the network of old logging roads and safe houses he'd prepared, a ghost fueled by rage and stolen cash. The king's head of security, the scarred wolf named Vorgan, reported that Kael was likely still in the territory, waiting. "A snake doesn't leave its nest until it's sure the eggs are dead," Vorgan grunted. "He's watching, and he's not alone." That warning became reality a week later. At dawn, a perimeter guard was found unconscious, a crude message carved into a tree beside him, "My house." That night, the pack's main generator was sabotaged. Fear, which had been simmering, began to boil. The pro-Kael faction started whispering. Asher was a puppet, the king was a colonizer, and only the true alpha could protect them. Asher's sister, Mara, found a note nailed to her door, "Traitor's blood runs the same." It was a line in the sand. Kael wasn't just hiding, he was rallying a shadow pack within the pack, using fear and nationalism as his weapons. The crisis exploded from a new direction. A delegation from the nearby Cascade Walker pack arrived at their border, led by their alpha, a stern woman named Anya. They weren't coming to offer aid. They were coming to collect a debt. Anya produced a contract, signed by Kael, that pledged a swath of Shadowfang's Eastern Ridge land the Walkers considered sacred as collateral against a loan of $500,000. The loan was due, with interest, in 72 hours. "We don't care about your internal politics," Anya stated coldly. "The paper is valid, pay, or we take the land by force." Asher was boxed in. The pack treasury was empty, siphoned into Cale's offshore accounts. The king's mandate prohibited using Northern Territory funds to pay off personal pack debts. It was a test of sovereignty. If Asher couldn't solve this, his leadership was over, and the pack would be torn apart in the ensuing war. Then, Eli found the key. Buried in the Timberhawk Holdings files was a billing address, a P.O. box in Seattle, and a series of wire transfers not to Cale, but to a separate account under the name J. Sterling. It was the human contractor. But the amounts were too large for mere contracting. This was a partnership. Asher and Vorgan took a team to the address. It wasn't a corporate office. It was a high-security data haven in downtown Seattle. Using the king's authority, they gained access. What they discovered rewrote the entire story. Cale hadn't been the mastermind. He was the muscle. The real architect was Julian Sterling, a human real estate mogul with a history of exploiting protected lands through shell companies and corrupt local officials. Sterling's plan wasn't just to log the ancestors' grove. He had blueprints for a massive luxury resort and mining operations spanning the entire Shadowfang territory. The pack wasn't a criminal enterprise. It was an asset to be liquidated. Cale's embezzlement? Pocket change compared to the 9-figure deal Sterling had brokered with an overseas investment group. The loan to the Cascade Walkers was a deliberate trap, set by Sterling to trigger a pack war that would destabilize the region and allow human authorities to declare it a conflict zone, paving the way for a federal land grab. The king's investigation had been focused on werewolf law, but the enemy wasn't just a rogue alpha, it was a human with the power to use human law as a weapon. Sterling had been pulling Cale's strings for years, and with his puppet on the run, he was now moving to secure his investment by other means. Asher returned to the pack house, the weight of this new truth crushing him. He called a council with Vorgan and Lynn. "We can't fight this with claws," he said, echoing a lesson he was learning in blood. Sterling operates in boardrooms and courtrooms. He's about to use the Cascade Walker debt to get a human judge to seize our land for non-payment of contractual obligations. Lynn, the auditor, looked up from her screens, a grim smile on her face. "Then we pay the debt." Asher stared at her. "With what?" "With Cale's money," she said. She pulled up a complex financial map. Sterling had been clever, but he'd gotten greedy. He'd used the same shell company, Timberhawk, to funnel his own investor funds. Lynn had traced a $20 million transfer from Sterling's investors that was sitting in a dormant account, awaiting the final green light for the resort. The account's security protocols were based on dual signatures, one from Sterling and one from his on-the-ground partner, Alpha Cale. "Cale's signature is a biometric key," Lynn explained. "We can't forge it. We need him to authorize the transfer." The room went quiet. They needed to find the traitorous, fleeing Alpha, convince him to betray his human partner, and steal $20 million from a ruthless mogul, all within 3 days, to save the pack from a war. It was an impossible heist, and it was their only shot. Vorgan broke the silence. "We know how to draw Cale out. He wants his house back, so we give him a chance to take it." He laid out a plan, a public ceremony, Asher's official provisional ascension, broadcast through pack channels, a show of weakness, of distraction, bait for a proud, desperate snake. Asher would stand before the entire pack and the Cascade Walker delegation to either announce he had the money or concede the land. It was the ultimate stage, and Cale, they were sure, wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to reclaim his throne in front of everyone who had witnessed his fall. The plan was set, the pieces were moving. Asher looked out at the mist-shrouded forest, the land he was now responsible for. He was no longer just choosing between being a monster or a martyr. He was choosing to become a thief, a strategist, and a kingmaker. The final play for the soul of the Shadowfang pack was about to begin, and the ground was shaking long before the first blow was struck. The ceremony was a masterpiece of staged vulnerability. The entire pack, the grim-faced Cascade Walkers, and a contingent of the King's Guards were gathered in the main clearing. Asher stood on a simple wooden platform, the weight of their collective fear and hope of physical pressure. He began to speak, his voice projecting a calm he didn't feel, detailing a future of transparency and hard work. Every word was bait, and the snake took it. Just as Asher reached the point of addressing the debt, a shot rang out. Not a bullet, but a high-velocity tranquilizer dart meant for him. It thudded into the podium instead, missing by inches. Chaos erupted. From the tree line, Cale emerged, flanked by a dozen loyalists armed with human-made rifles. He looked feral, unkempt, but his eyes burned with triumph. "This farce ends now," he roared. "I am your alpha. This pup and his kingly masters seek to sell our birthright." It was the moment Vorgan had predicted. Kale needed the spectacle, the dramatic reclamation. As Shadowfang guards and King's enforcers moved to intercept, a frantic firefight of tranq darts and non-lethal rounds broke out, creating a screen of confusion. Kale ignored it, striding directly toward the platform, his focus laser-locked on Asher. This was personal. Asher didn't flinch. He stepped down, meeting Kale in the open space between the lines. "It's over, Kale. Sterling's using you. The grove, the land, it's all for his resort." Kale spat. "He's a tool, a means to real power, the kind you're too weak to grasp." He lunged, not in a full shift, but with alpha-enhanced speed, a knife flashing in his hand. Asher parried, the clash of steel ringing out. They were evenly matched in strength, but Asher had been defending for years, Kale had been killing. The older alpha was faster, more vicious, driving Asher back, but Asher wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to get close. As their blades locked, Asher growled into Kale's face. "He's cutting you out. The 20 million? It's sitting in Timberhawk. He can't touch it without your key, and he's found another way." A flicker of doubt in Kale's eyes. A microsecond of hesitation. It was enough. From the crowd, Eli darted forward, looking terrified but determined, holding a sleek satellite tablet. On the screen was a live feed of Julian Sterling in a corporate office, speaking to a man in a suit. "Once the Cascade Walkers trigger the conflict, the insurance claim will be undeniable. The land will be deemed unstable, we'll call in the federal environmental clause, and Timberhawk's claim will be settled for pennies, a clean wipe." Kale froze, watching his human partner casually plan to erase him from the equation. The rage that followed was incandescent. "Where is he?" Kale bellowed. "Seattle," Asher said, panting, pressing his advantage. "He thinks you're a rabid dog he can put down. He's about to transfer the funds to a new shell, locking you out forever. Your key expires at midnight." The betrayal was complete. Kale's alliance shattered. In that moment of pure, venomous fury, his desire for revenge on Sterling outweighed his hatred for Asher. "What do you want?" Kale snarled. "The transfer," Asher said. "You authorize the 20 million from Timberhawk to an account we control. We use it to pay the walkers and save the pack. You get to watch Sterling lose everything." It was a devil's bargain. Kale's eyes darted from the tablet to Asher's face. Behind him, his loyalists were being subdued. He was out of moves. With a guttural sound of defeat, he grabbed the tablet from Eli's hands. He pressed his thumb to the scanner, then looked into the retinal camera. The authorization screen flashed green. $20 million began its digital journey. The instant it was done, Vorgen and 2 King's guards were on Kale, disarming him and clamping silver-laced restraints on his wrists. The fight left him completely, replaced by a hollow stare. The resolution was swift. The transfer cleared. Before the stunned Cascade Walker delegation, Asher authorized the payment of the debt with interest, the funds appearing in their account in real time. Alpha Anya examined the confirmation, gave a curt, respectful nod to Asher, and withdrew her wolves. The immediate war was averted. But Sterling remained. With the money gone and his plot exposed, he scrambled. He filed lawsuits, called in favors with local politicians, and even tried to get human law enforcement to investigate the theft. This is where the Alpha King's power shifted from physical to absolute. The Northern Territory's legal team, a group of werewolf and human lawyers, who operated in the shadows of high finance, unleashed a counter-barrage. They filed their own lawsuit, presenting evidence of Sterling's fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit environmental destruction. They leaked key details to financial regulators and the media. Within 48 hours, Julian Sterling was fighting for his professional life, his investors fleeing, his assets frozen. The resort project was dead. The King's final word on the matter was delivered not by roar, but by a press release from a Wall Street journal. Timberhawk Holdings had been acquired by a private conservation trust, which permanently placed the Shadowfang territory under protected status. At the formal council hearing a week later, held via secure link to Obsidian Peak, the judgments were delivered. Alpha Kale was sentenced to permanent confinement in a high-security pack prison deep in the Northern Territory, cut off from the moon and his power, a living testament to his failure. His loyalists were given a choice: exile or probation under the new regime. Then the King addressed Asher. "Beta Asher Vance, you refused an unjust order. You secured your pack's survival, you uncovered a threat that crossed into the human world and neutralized it. The Council recognizes your provisional leadership as legitimate and permanent. The Shadowfang Pack is hereby restored under your alphaship, with a mandate of reform and oversight from the Northern Territory for a period of 5 years. It was victory, it was redemption. But the final surprise came after the link closed. The king's head of security, Vorgan, requested to stay on with a small team, not as overseers, but as liaisons. The king sees potential, Vorgan said, his scarred face serious, not just for this pack, for you. This territory needs a strong moral alpha who understands both the old ways and the new wars. Consider this an extended interview. Asher stood on the ridge overlooking his territory, the same place where he'd almost become a killer. The forest was quiet, no longer heavy with fear, but breathing with possibility. He was no longer a beta forced to choose. He was an alpha who had chosen and in doing so had remade his world. The ground had shaken, the king had arrived, and in the rubble of the old regime Asher Vance had finally found not just his rank, but his true purpose. The story of Beta Asher Vance is more than a tale of werewolf politics. It's a blueprint for what happens when conscience crashes into power. For years he believed strength was about enforcing order, about blind loyalty to the system. But true power, the kind that reshapes territories and earns the respect of kings, revealed itself in the opposite act, in lowering his weapon, in choosing mercy over mandate. He didn't win because he was the strongest fighter. He won because he was the only one willing to be morally accountable in a den of predators. He outmaneuvered a tyrant and a billionaire not with greater fangs, but with greater integrity. The Alpha King didn't arrive to save him. He arrived to recognize the rarity of a wolf who could be both loyal and just, who could uphold the spirit of the pack even when it meant breaking the Alpha's law. The lingering question isn't about what Asher will build with his new authority. It's about the silent beaters in other packs, in other systems, who are right now being given an unjust order. Will they remember the tremor in the earth when the king arrived for the beater who said no? Hard karma doesn't just come for the blatantly evil. It meticulously unravels the choices of those who thought they had none. Asher's journey proves that sometimes the most revolutionary act is not seizing a throne, but refusing to be the executioner. If you were captivated by this deep dive into loyalty, power, and redemption, do the pack a favor. Smash that like button to fuel more stories like this. Share your favorite moment of Asher's transformation in the comments below. Was it when he dropped the knife or when he outsmarted Sterling? And subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss when we explore the hidden hierarchies and heart-pumping drama of worlds hidden in plain sight. Thanks for watching.